appreciate it.
Yeah.
I like my picture just fine. Yeah, so founder of Townsend's Tea Company and Brew Dr. Kombucha. I think it's every undergrad business student's dream to be invited to speak at something like this, and it's not lost on me. I'm thrilled to be here. But first, let's talk about kombucha, because maybe not everybody knows what it is. It's a little bit of a weird word. Quick show of hands if you consider yourself a kombucha drinker. Oh yeah, it's Portland, baby. I love it. Portland drinks 76 times more kombucha than the average US city. That is the thing. Okay, so how many of those people drank it 5 years ago? Drank it 5 years ago? Okay. How about 10 years ago? Any early adopters? Yeah, awesome. That's great. Kombucha is, at its basic, if I was just going to give one line, it's a fizzy iced tea that's good for you, right? That's the one-liner. But really what it is, it's a great way to get fermented food into your daily diet. You take sweetened tea, you add it to a little bit of previously fermented kombucha. It's a bacteria and yeast mix, and you let that sit for, it looks about like that. If you put it in a jar at home, you put a cloth over the top, it'd take about 5 days, and it would turn into one batch of kombucha. And the whole point is all these live and active cultures that promote proper digestive health, detoxification. Really what kombucha is a great way to get bad habit drinks out of your diet, whether those be traditional carbonated soft drinks, diet sodas or energy drinks that have a lot of, ingredients you can't pronounce. What it isn't, kombucha is not a mushroom, it's not a fungus. It's a common misconception. People think that there's a mushroom in there. There's not. Kombucha is also not new. It's about 2,000 plus years old, origins in the Russia-Tibet border region. And, if you had some progressive foodies in your household in the 80s, you might have tried it back in the day. It had a little surge of popularity in Japan and in the United States in the 1980s. We hear a lot of stories of people whose hippie grandma made them try something when they were a kid. Kombucha also does not have to taste horrible, but it can. First time I tried kombucha, I thought I threw up in my mouth a little bit. If you over-ferment it, it basically turns into vinegar, and then you try to drink it like it's water or something, you get a big surprise. So that's kombucha. And kombucha is part of my story. It's a big part of my story, but it's not all the story. I'm happy to say my story is a U of O story. In 2002, I was a senior in business school at the U of O. My BA 452 class project was you had to come up with a new business that served an underserved niche market. And write a business plan. That was the term-long project. And I came up with the idea that tea consumers were underserved. Coffee houses were booming everywhere. There was nowhere for the tea drinker to go to celebrate everything you could do with tea. And I fell in love with the idea. I fell in love with the idea while I went through the process of writing it and learning more and more about tea. I didn't have a job lined up the last week in school, and I almost, I had a conversation with my professor about, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, and he was pretty sure I should add coffee if I was really going to make a go of it. I believed in tea. Long story short, I didn't end up starting the tea house right out of school. I went and I had very uninspiring jobs and maybe even more uninspiring bosses for about a year, and that was great because that meant that I had this entrepreneurial itch. If I would have had a great inspiring boss or a job that felt compelling, maybe I would have stayed there, and I'm sure I would have had a fine career. But I was motivated to work for myself. I really wanted to do something extraordinary and get everything out of the effort I was going to put in. So while I was working those day jobs, I would work nights and weekends on the business plan, try to zero in on how many dollars it would really cost to open a tea house. And I gave that business plan to anyone who would take it. I mean, my aunts and uncles got it, whether they wanted it or not. My friends, my friends' parents, was taking investments. I literally took a $100 investment from someone's grandma, who's still a part owner of the company today for that. Yeah. Another great story is the job I quit to start the tea house. I was merchandising rep for Coca-Cola products, and the backroom receiving clerk at a Fred Meyer was upset that I was leaving because I actually did a good job for him. And I was like, oh, I'm starting my own business. And he's like, oh, tell me about it. I gave him a business plan. He ended up investing $3,000, and he owns 1% of the company. That's how it all starts, right? I needed $40,000 to get this tea house open, I thought. And I got to $45,000, and I was like, did it. Which is crazy. you got to have maybe 6 to 12 months of operating capital. I mean, it was good that I was naive and just was like, oh yeah, I got this. That's enough money. So this is what it looked like. I was the carpenter, I was the painter, I was the electrician, I was the plumber. I got it, and I'd never done that stuff before, but I knew that I would save a lot of money if I didn't pay professionals to do it. I just paid professionals to make the final connection, get the permit, make it all good with the city. I got the first tea house open, and I had a little bit of money to spare. And like crickets, like nobody came in. It was an insane exercise in patience. Hours would go by between customers. I would read a book at the counter, and get a good couple of chapters in sometimes. It was very difficult, very, very difficult. So, the business was surviving on extremely small revenue for the first few years. We did crazy things like we made our own ice because I couldn't afford an ice machine or to buy bagged ice. So literally 40 ice cube trays in the freezer and replenishing every time I emptied one into a cooler, fill it back up with water, right back in the freezer. At the same time, my wife and I were surviving on very low income. She was founding a nonprofit, which she successfully did, but that meant we were on my single, tiny, basically tips income. We had a tiny little spot in Northeast Portland and did things like in the winter, we would only heat one little room, called it the cozy room, put the TV in there. You could see your breath in the rest of the house, that kind of thing. So we were poor, but we were happy and we were young and we were educated and we were poor. And that, and we were poor. Those four things, I think, are a recipe for a very energetic optimism. And my wife Bethany and I were both motivated to be our own bosses, and we ultimately did that and didn't give up. I mean, even with that optimism, though, there were definitely days where I was always jealous of the postman, right? Because he got to come and go. He went home at the end of the day, and he got paid 5 times as much as me. I still there were days that I thought we couldn't make it, but one thing I tell groups of entrepreneurs is definitely take money from friends and family, because you don't want to go to Thanksgiving and say to Uncle Bob, I lost your money that you invested in me. Didn't want to make any of those phone calls. So that's one thing that really got me through those hard years, was not wanting to tell the friends and family that I failed and lost their money. So 3-4 years go on, I finally get a following. I make it to the point where I can get out from behind the counter and I still pay myself a few $1,000s a month. And so I run down to the bank, I'm like, I did it, I'm out from behind the counter, I'm ready to start my next one, can I have a loan for $50,000? I figured that's how it works, a successful business. And I gave them my financials, and they came back and they said, here's a personal credit card with a $7,000 limit. So I said, thank you, I'll take it. And then I went to another bank and I did the same thing. And I went home and I dug around in the recycling and I got the Capital One, advertisement. Now, all in all, I got 5 credit cards, each with about a $7,000 limit. American Express hooked me up with $8,600. That was sweet. And I started my second tea house in Bend. And my in-laws lived in Bend. I had a place to crash. I had spent enough time there to realize that I thought that it would take to a tea house really well. I got this place open with that credit card debt, working 8 a.m. to 1 a.m. Again, doing all the carpentry, acid staining the concrete floors, building all the cabinetry, figuring all that out to do it as cheaply as possible. Got to know the Bend Police Department really well, because I would always be going home really late at night, and there was nothing else to do for Bend cops, so I got pulled over because I drove like a Honda Civic. I don't know. Anyway, January 2008 is when I got it open, the end of December, early January, and it took right off, thankfully. But at the same time, I didn't figure it would take right off, because the other tea house didn't. So I didn't hire anybody. So I had 0 employees. It was open 13 hours a day. Another one goes down. 13 hours a day, 7 days a week, no employees. I had Bethany come over there and work the register while I set about trying to train people in the off hours and get it going. So middle of 2008 rolls around. I've got 2 successful tea houses going. And really, I had learned enough to know that my successes were coming from the products that my consumers were really excited about, and I would keep working on them and tinkering and getting feedback from my customers, the guests, the tea houses. And in the middle of 2008, they started asking me about kombucha. I didn't know what it was, and that's when I had that experience I spoke about. But I learned about it, and I learned to make it in such a way that it doesn't have to taste bad, right? You just have to know what you're doing. And so with a lot of tinkering with with staff at the tea houses, we set about making kombucha in the kitchens, and we couldn't make enough of it. And the staff loved it, which was really telling as well. It quickly became one of the sought-after products in the tea house. So I recognized that as an opportunity to, hey, here's something where I don't just have to open tea house after tea house to grow my company. This is a product that I can just make a bunch of and try to sell all over. So I leased the basement of my Alberta Street in the Northeast Portland tea house, and this is what it looked like early on. You can see some of my electrical work there in the corner and drywall work. So, I mean, food grade buckets, cloths over the top. These little batches of kombucha would ferment for about a week. Pour them through a funnel into bottles, put the cap on, print a label, all the things, and take it off to any local store that would buy it. And we had one table, and then we had 2 tables, 3, then we had racks with 40 buckets on it. And before long, we had 400 of these buckets of kombucha going in this little basement, which, if you've ever made kombucha at home, it gives off kind of a pungent, acetic vinegar smell. And so 400 little things of kombucha give off like a sharp burn of vinegar aroma. And so people would walk by and be like, what's going on? And customers who would come up to me and be like, man, I love it here, but I go home and my clothes smell like vinegar. And the fruit fly population was biblical down there at times. So I knew we had to get out of there, but I also knew I was onto something. The banks still weren't gonna do anything for me. I had a bunch of personal credit card debt to pay down. But I found out about the Whole Foods Local Producer Loan Program. It was very early days for Whole Foods in this, where they'll give small food producers a loan based not on your financial history, but on your financial future, if only you had a little bit more equipment. So this was the day, there's me in the middle. This was the day we got our $48,000 check, which seemed incredibly immense to me. It was extremely meaningful. We got up out of the basement, and of course we went onto the roof of our new facility because we just felt like we had to get as high as we could because we'd been down in the basement for so long. These 2 guys, Greg and Mo, with me there, are also U of O alum, and they're still my 2 brewmasters today. So they were with me from the basement all the way to where we've gone, and it's been exciting to have those guys. Yeah, they're great. We'd already done the hard work of crafting these tea recipes for service to our guests at the tea houses. So we had this ready list of over 100 kinds of tea that we were tinkering with and making really interesting kombuchas with. And that was really one of the things that set us apart early on in kombucha. So we were out of the basement. We were in 4,000 square feet in Southeast Portland. We were off to the races. We felt great. We were growing. We were making more. There was some automation. And then same company that helped us pulled all the kombucha off their shelves in the middle of 2010 for a good reason. Kombucha is a raw fermentation, and sugar is eating yeast, and part of that byproduct is alcohol. And early on, small kombucha producers, didn't really even know. They thought, hey, it's tea. It's this weird culturing fermentation process. I'm not a fermentation scientist. I don't know that alcohol happens. And a lot of us were in that situation. Yeah, she knew. Anyway, but everybody had to find a way back onto the shelf, right? And a lot of kombucha companies, diluted, they added a bunch of juice, they made a really concentrated vinegary kombucha and added it to sparkling water and some lab-grown, probiotics and called it kombucha. We were committed to making the same delicious kombucha we always did and finding a way to get it back out there. And what we came up with was extremely unique. Whereas everybody was looking at how to kind of, either tinker with the yeast and bacteria, we just looked to technology. We found a method of distillation called a spinning cone column that removes alcohol from a liquid without the use of excess heat. It's basically a vacuum still. It reduces the atmospheric pressure inside the distillation chamber to a level such that ethanol turns into a gas at a very low temperature, under 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And the transit time through there is really quick. Long story short, the kombucha doesn't get pasteurized, the alcohol gets stripped away, and you're left with authentic, real kombucha with all alive and active cultures that doesn't have this alcohol issue. So we figured that out and acquired that technology, and it was extremely difficult, and it gave us a strategic advantage. And so we set about growing, and we finally were able to get some bank debt. This is simple graph, means exactly what it means. We took off 2010 to 2014. We grew 100% a year. We grew 200% in 2014. We were emerging from being a very small business, and I was still wearing all the hats, and of course I was still guaranteeing all the debt. It just had gone from credit cards to a giant SBA loan. In 2015, I found out for the first time that we were a major player. I had never known that there was such a thing as industry data. I went to the second annual Kombucha Brewers Conference. That's a thing. And there was a lady there who was from a company that like reports on food and beverage. And literally, you know, I was learning things as I went with no advisors, so I didn't know that that existed. And there we were on the list at number 3, just making kombucha for Oregon, Washington, and a little bit of Northern California at that point. And that was the aha moment where I was like, I feel like I've taken this thing big so far compared to my 2 little tea houses, but this is going to be much bigger. And I sat in the back of that conference and I drew up plans for a 50,000 square foot brewery when we had only had about 9,000 square feet. And within a week of returning home, I had secured an $8 million letter from a bank and signed a lease for a 50,000 square foot building in Tualatin. It was very busy. And this is what it looks like. We're out there in Tualatin. If you ever want a tour, we give tours to a lot of the U of O business classes to show them how we've grown. But you know, everything was on the line. You know, again, my wife and I personally guaranteeing loans, and it paid off. In 2015, we made about 2 million bottles. In 2018, we did about 20 million bottles. So significant growth. We've actually become one of the largest brewers in the state, which is pretty. You know, in a beer state, I'm pretty proud of that. We've continued to reinvest in that same brewery to unlock the next level of growth for kombucha. Of course, there were challenges going from 2 million bottles to 20 million. I won't get into the nitty-gritty of beverage manufacturing and glass and everything that goes along with food safety. But really the hardest things were taking off all these hats, right? I was the sales department, I was the marketing department, I was the plant manager, I was the HR guy, I guess. Yeah, so figuring out when to do what, and of course it was always too late. Finally hired a proper CPA, a salesperson. Oh, hey, there's no marketing effort to support the sales effort. Oh, hey, we've got 65 employees and no HR person, stuff like that, right? And so kind of threading that needle of how to how to grow the organization the right way. That was the hard thing, and of course we made mistakes, but the mistakes, weren't so bad that we didn't make it through. The other challenge was maintaining our culture as we grew. I had a lot of that OG crew that was with me, my original people, and as we grew, I needed to bring in professionals who'd been there, done that, and seen growth of this level, and been able to do all the things, build the distribution network, sign up all the brokers, do all the stuff that goes along with growing a beverage company. And so that was very difficult as well. And one thing that really helped was we got B Corp certified. B Corp certification, if you don't know, is a commitment to your people, your community, and your planet. So you have a triple bottom line. It's not just profit. And Portland is actually the largest concentration of B Corps in the world. And it's a very Portland thing to do, but it's also a common sense way of doing business. I think you'll start to see a lot more B Corps. So the next challenge is looking ahead and evolving the vision. In my case, I'm looking back at kind of our tea roots, and we've got this really cool story of Townsend's Tea Company, and Brew Dr grew out of it, and the innovation really has been centered around Brew Dr now, and we want to take that effort back to everything we do. So we're going to unite the brands. We're doing it right now, actually. The Alberta Street Tea House reopens on Monday as a Brew Dr tea house. And it's bittersweet to let go of my Townsend's name, but now that we've got this unified effort, the employees are rallying around it. It's so much easier to tell this story, and it takes Brew Dr from just being a kombucha company and able to compete there into the wider world of tea, because we've got this sales department, marketing department, all the back end to support that effort, and we've got these tea houses. We have 7 tea houses now to support that and be our testing grounds and our innovation labs. So really excited about what's to come and hoping to continue to do something extraordinary.